Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast. Here's our next episode, so hope you enjoy, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Inside LSU. All right, everybody, welcome into a Wednesday edition of the Inside the Tigers podcast, keeping our eyes on the Tigers 24/7. Today, we're lucky enough to be joined by LSU digital media reporter Cody Worsham. You can follow him on Twitter at Cody Worsham. Cody, thanks for coming in today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So it's National Signing Day. LSU lands Devonta Lee, but misses out on Ishmael Sobcher. Regardless, a tremendous class for Ed Orgeron. But we're going to dedicate this episode to basketball. So for more coverage on signing day, follow us on Twitter at Inside LSU. All right, so we're going to dive right into Saturday's loss. Cody, I know you don't have the ability to read minds, but I think it's safe to say a 30-foot alley-oop probably wasn't in the game plan for Coach Wade. What was your reaction to how that final sequence went down?
So I have a bit of a contrarian take on this play. I'll start by saying this. I don't think it was the right play. I think going back and watching film, both Will Wade and Tremont Waters would like to have it back. That said, my contrarian take is this. One, LSU went down fighting. They went down the aggressor. If you go in the LSU basketball practice facility, there's a big sign up there that says chance favors the aggressor. And LSU didn't lose that game by being not aggressive enough. Tremont Waters didn't go into a shell and cower from the moment. He tried to make a play. And he tried to make a play that's been really successful for LSU this year, the alley-oop to Marlon Taylor. If you kind of dig into the numbers, it's a high percentage play for LSU. If the pass is 4 inches lower, the roof of the PMAC is blown off. LSU goes up 3 and probably wins going away. So, again, not the right play, one that you'd like to have back, one that you learn and grow from, but I like the guts that Tremont Waters displayed. I like the percentages behind it. I like that those things, I think, are things that you can carry forward, learn from, know that at that point in the game the clock is your biggest enemy and not necessarily the opponent. But I like the way that LSU carried itself in that comeback.
Yeah, him and Marlon Taylor have had that connection all year. But it's hard to say if you drive to the hoop, get fouled. Gafford was fouled out there in the double bonus that they don't end up winning that game. But would you say that was the loudest PMAC crowd of the last couple of years? I mean, it was awesome to see how the crowd just willed the team back in the second half.
Yeah, I've been covering LSU since 2010, and that was the loudest that it's been since I've been covering them. There's been a couple Kentucky games that were loud. The Oklahoma game in 2016 was loud. As a kid growing up, I remember a couple of Arizona games that John Brady was the head coach that were pretty loud, but that was about as tenacious of a crowd as I can remember. Actually, I said this on my podcast, Boot Up. When I left the game, like my face just felt hot. Like I felt like I was running a fever because the crowd was so loud and so intense. So that's really big for LSU. That's something they got to build on, but I wasn't expecting that with Arkansas not being a ranked team. I didn't think that the crowd would be that crazy, but lo and behold, it was a sellout, and the crowd was crazy. So that's something that LSU can build on.
Yeah, and it was interesting because it's not like LSU came back and cut it to 7 and the crowd got into it. The crowd, it was 15 down, and the crowd, was getting hype and everything, even though they were still so far back. We all know LSU has been walking on a tightrope for a little while. How important now do you feel this 3-game stretch coming up with Mississippi State, Auburn, Kentucky is, even so now with a loss Saturday?
Yeah, I look at the next 6 games. I think Georgia on the road is mixed in there. Anytime you travel on the road in the SEC, it's tough. Florida's in there, and then Tennessee is coming to Baton Rouge. I think it's huge. I kind of before the season, I sat down and looked at the schedule and I said, there's kind of this 8-game start that LSU has that there's a bunch of winnable games in. Then there's this 6-game stretch that's tough. I said if they can go 7-1 through that 8-game stretch, they'll be in a good position to see where they are going into that 6 games, and that'll be SEC title or top 3, top 4 in the SEC. This stretch will determine that. So they achieved part 1. They got through that first 8. They won 7. That's good, and now they put themselves in a spot to see where they are and kind of measure up with the best of the SEC. I think it's a stretch that they can manage well and they're positioned well for right now.
Yeah, it's true. February is a new beast for LSU. Starting fast in January was definitely something they had to do, and they did. How do you see LSU matching up with State tonight specifically?
Yeah, it's gonna be a good matchup. Mississippi State's really good. I actually like the matchup for LSU because I thought Will Wade talked a little bit about this earlier this week. The way that they tried to guard Arkansas in this last game was they took 3 or 4 guys that don't typically make shots for Arkansas and just didn't guard them. They let them shoot and tried to focus on some other guys. That worked for LSU last year. I think Will Wade probably realizes now, as I do in hindsight, that's not the way that this LSU team needs to defend. I think this LSU team is good enough to just match up with people and play ball. And Mississippi State requires that. You can't leave anybody open. They're going to put 5 guys on the floor at all times that can score, whether it's the 2 Weatherspoons, whether it's Lamar Peters, Eric Holman, Reggie Perry, who's the SEC Freshman of the Week. They got guys that can get buckets. So LSU's going to have to come out aggressive on the front foot defensively rather than conceding some things. They're going to try to take everything away, which I think will put them in a better mindset and hopefully put them on the front foot going forward.
Yeah, well, they're 4-0 on the road so far in SEC play, so they put that to the test tonight at Mississippi State. So moving on from Saturday, you've been covering this team in depth. Can you describe Coach Wade's attention to detail and coaching style for some of the listeners who just see him on TV as LSU's coach?
Yeah, he's the most detail-oriented human being I've ever been around, much less coach. Every decision that he makes with the program is carefully thought through, and that trickles down to the rest of his staff. I interviewed Greg Golden, their strength coach for Boot Up this week, and his attention to detail with their workouts. He knows exactly what every player needs to lift that day. He tailors lifts for players. Will is the same way. He has a psychologist, a sports psychologist that he consults probably daily during the season, and they'll talk about every player. They'll talk about every player, every decision, which players he should eat dinner with, which players he should put an arm around that day, which players he should jump on and be a little bit more aggressive with. Every decision is thought through, and he also does everything basically the same every day, same schedule, same routine. So he's the most precise and attention to detail oriented person I've ever been around, and you see that in the program from top to bottom.
Yeah, the biggest difference for me from watching a Will Wade coach team is LSU's playing with a type of defense and passion and effort the program hasn't seen in quite some time. Contesting shots, diving for loose balls, energy everywhere on the floor. It's awesome to watch. Other than the questionable decision late on Saturday, in what areas do you see improvement from Tremont's game this year? Given now he's got playmakers around him that he didn't have last season, how has that changed his game?
It's made him a completely different player, really. If you just look at the types of shots he's getting, last year he had to do everything off the dribble. He had to create everything for this team. This year he's getting a lot more catch-and-shoot looks, and he's really excelled in that area of his game. I think he's shooting like 47, 48% on catch-and-shoot threes, which is an elite number. His finishing around the rim has drastically improved. He's added a lot of just little footwork maneuvers that he didn't have last year. He's finishing with both hands, so that's good to see. I think defensively is where he's grown the most. He wasn't a liability last year, but teams could try to exploit his size. This year, you can't try to exploit Tremont. He'll exploit you. I keep hearing from NBA scouts on Twitter and people that I have conversations with that steals are a number that typically translates well to the next level, and that NBA scouts really look at if a prospect is borderline, they look at his steals. Well, Tremont, if you're looking at that, he's not borderline. He's one of the best in the nation at. His anticipation is phenomenal. His quickness is phenomenal. He's really grown this year. He's got to continue to grow, but it's almost the opposite of last year. Last year, he was great in the non-conference, and in conference, he was still very good, but his numbers dipped, especially efficiency speaking. This year, it's the opposite. He wasn't as efficient in non-conference play, but since the start of conference, he's been super efficient. His turnovers are down. His shooting is way up. So it's good to see that growth in his game.
Yeah, and the topic of Tremont, after the season's over, in your opinion, how many of the starters, whether it be him, Naz Reid, Emmett Williams, do you see testing the NBA draft waters, and how many of them do you think ultimately return for next season because they can continue to build something special here?
Yeah, testing it, I could see a number of guys testing it. Will Wade said last year he really liked what Tremont Waters got from testing the waters last year, just the ability to get feedback from scouts, and the rules have changed in the last few years to where you can test the waters, you can work out for teams, you can get that feedback and still come back and not worry about your eligibility. So a couple of guys may test. I don't know. I think Naz and Tremont are the two to keep an eye on because those were the guys before the season that probably had that circled on their goal sheet. I'm sure all those guys did, but those are the two most prominent guys. So I think those are the only two that have a shot, not a realistic shot, but are the likeliest. I think those are the two likeliest to test the waters and to enter the draft. But we'll see. I mean, there is a culture being built here at LSU that I think guys are going to want to come back and play for something special. And regardless, even if those two guys do go next year, I think a team that you build around Javonte Smart, Emmett Williams, some of the guys that LSU will sign, Darius Days, I think is going to drastically improve. I think that's still a team that can compete for top 25, Sweet 16 type of a run and make a run in March next year.
Yeah, I mean, if you're an NBA scout, you're looking at Nas. He's a 6'10", 250-pounder. He can shoot it like a guard. He's got the handles of a guard. I mean, even let's say he just does poorly the whole rest of the year. I mean, if you're an NBA scout, you're like drooling at the mouth. You could mold him into a phenomenal player at the next level. Finally, LSU Tennessee is sold out. It's in the PMAC. How do you see the Tigers stacking up against the Vols? And do you think it's a little weird that's an 11 a.m. tip? You think it's that would be a 5 a.m. or 5 p.m., 6 p.m. ESPN kind of game?
Yeah, they picked that stuff early in the season. I know Will Wade was disappointed that LSU didn't get more primetime Saturday games, but it's still sold out. It'll still be crazy. I think LSU actually matches up about as well with Tennessee as any other team in the conference. Just the challenges that Tennessee presents, I think LSU has answers for. No one has an answer for Grant Williams, but they do have some bodies they can throw at him, whether they put a Cavell Bigby Williams on him to put someone bigger on him, whether they kind of go like for like with Emmett Williams or they put Naz on him. They have some options to throw at him. I think Tremont and Jordan Bone is a really good point guard matchup. Two guys that very, very different games, but effective point guards. And then Tennessee's wings that can kind of drive and shoot, Admiral Schofield being chief among them. LSU has bodies. Marlon Taylor can you can see the matchup there. So LSU's going to have to play well, have to play better than they have in this last little stretch of games where they've lost a game, where they almost lost at Missouri. But I do see the matchups that LSU could go into that Tennessee game and have a chance to win.
It's LSU digital media reporter Cody Worsham. You can listen to his stuff, his podcast, Boot Up, is it on Spotify? Everywhere? Spotify, iTunes, wherever you listen to podcasts, go listen to that. You can follow us on Twitter at Inside LSU for more signing day coverage. It's the Inside the Tigers podcast, keeping our eyes on the Tigers 24/7.